All right. Hello out there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Jason Levine. Thank you for joining me today on twitch.tv/Adobe. And for the next hour, we are going to begin part 5 of Audio 101. And today's focus is going to be on using delay, echo, and reverb effects in Audition CC. Now, I'm just going to let people in the channel start filing in here. I wanted to do this particular lesson today. One, it's a holiday here in the U.S., so happy Memorial Day to those of you on this side of the pond. So I don't know what our audience is going to be like today. But also, in the last few weeks, as I've been doing a lot of music mixing, a lot of dialogue mixing, I've been getting a lot of questions about when to use different types of delays, what they represent, why do we have several different delays, how come people sometimes refer to phase and flange as a delay effect, and these kinds of questions have been coming up a bit more. So I thought I would sort of address that in this hour dedicated to Audio 101. Also worth mentioning, thank you. If you want to see more of me doing audio, video, and other things here outside of the Adobe channel, you can follow me on my channel, twitch.tv/Beetlejace. Good morning, everybody. Hey, Ian. All right. Animated Punk, how are you? Limo Leo, nice to see you. Crisis Around. Rock on. The holiday bit in the UK. Right, of course. So, hey, Magenta X. Schwartzweiss, hey. BBKC, nice. Hey, Neil, how are you? Hey, South Eye. And Finch. And CBR Network. Admiral Shane. Vision Mind. From your Neanderthal cave in Germany. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Cezanne, stuff like that. Boy Fruit, how are you? So, as always, we've got a lot of content here, a lot to cover, and it's never really enough time. But I think with delay, echo, and reverb, I can get it down to exactly 1 hour. Keep in mind, if you want to see the previous episodes 1 through 4, you can watch them here on twitch.tv/Adobe in the video on demand and in highlights. You can also find them on my YouTube channel, which you can find if you subscribe to me here on Twitch as well. Just follow me, here on Twitch as well. And you'll find my YouTube link, which is youtube.com/JasonLevineVideo. Okay, sup, Zacho4. So, hey, Dan.io, good to see you. So, what? All right, so let's get started. So when we're talking about delay, there are lots of different elements of delay and lots of different reasons why you use delays. And I'm going to cover sort of all of the basic concepts for using different types of delays and some different scenarios where you will also use some delays. I'm going to first just start by opening up a couple of files here, and one of which is an audio stinger that I did for one of our very own supermods here some time ago. I'm hoping I've got the right file here as well. I hate when I don't. All right, let me just play this back for a second and take a listen to this. Nerds. Geeks. There it is. All right, fantastic. All right. Ugly Joe. Mobile quality for the win. Beanie Main. Excellent. All right. Nice. Okay, so... And in fact, I'm going to start by converting this to mono. So we're going to start with just a very basic mono voiceover, okay? We'll actually make this 48K. And some of the reasons why you may use delay effects. Well, delay effects are used in everything from vocals on songs to radio broadcasts, satellite broadcasts, and largely in promotional materials. So stingers, station identifications. You know, whenever you hear those kinds of things, I used to do them a lot years ago, and there's a station out here in the desert where I live called KSLX, and you'd always hear, in this particular radio voice, KSLX, and somehow when that X part would come up, it would just get very wide, it would seem very large, the stereo got bigger, wider, there was a little bit of this kind of delay, a slight kind of echo. And when I was extremely young, back when radio was still a thing, this always mesmerized me, how you'd have this kind of very centered monophonic sound, and suddenly when they would say KSL X, it got very loud, very wide, very huge. That's all done with delay. and it can be achieved very, very easily. Now, the kinds of delays that you use, whether you're working, hey, Keith 984, if you're working with mono versus stereo, you can create different types of effects, and some of them will actually work or are meant to be used in a stereo environment, whereas others will create potentially unwanted artifacts if you use them in mono. So let me get my headphones on here so I can hear exactly what we're doing. You can hear all the fans blowing rapidly today. We're listening to my pal Fuzzy. All right. Very cool. Oh, hey, Paulina. Evilive, do I like Red Bull? No, not at all. All right, so let's go ahead and let me make all this stuff muted here, and let's start. All right, now, if you go up to the Effects menu, as always, you will see that we have a couple of different delays, all right? So we're going to start with the actual just delay effect, and then we'll probably hit the analog delay and the echo, all right? And a delay, just at its root, is just that. It's basically taking a signal, in this case our voice over here, and delaying the playback of that signal by a number of typically milliseconds, okay? So you always have kind of the direct sound, or generally you have the direct sound with no effect, and then you might say, okay, I want it to repeat 60 milliseconds later. Now remember, milliseconds, it's 1,000 milliseconds per second, right? So 10 milliseconds is very short, 20 milliseconds, very short. But as you go above about 30 milliseconds, you start entering into a different domain known as like slapback delay. And all of those shorter delays typically create the kinds of effects that, and I've used this word, I don't believe it is one, that kind of stereo-ize your sound. And these are techniques that are used every day, and they've been used for ages, back when it was analog, actual analog delay, versus now everything that we do digitally. All right? So, trying to read through the comments here. All right, nice. Okay, excellent. So let me just take a listen. Let me play you this. Now, this is, again, for a station ID for a station called Codebase Radio. And check this out. And this is just the raw, unprocessed vocal. We'll take a listen to this first. Nerds, geeks, code, cool, Codebase Radio. Okay. Now, we can obviously make this bigger, louder, wider, and for the purpose of kind of accentuating or over-accentuating the delay a bit and making it a bit more present on the stream, I'm simply going to do that. I'm actually just going to very quickly compress this with one of my favorite multi-band limiters here. And just so that this is just very loud and kind of even-keeled, all right? Or sort of even in dynamics. Nerds, geeks, code, cool. All right, so let's go ahead and apply that. And that's a third-party effect, so you don't have to worry about that. We're not going to come back to that one for a while. Okay, so monofile voiceover. And we want to add some delay to kind of give this a little bit of an effect. Now, as I mentioned, when you pull up the delay effect on a mono file, okay, and I'm showing you this first in mono because this is kind of one of those essential things. When short delays are mixed with a direct sound, remember, short delays, we're going to classify those as anything from 30 milliseconds and below. You're going to get typically what's known as kind of a comb filtering effect. And this can be best described as, well, you're going to hear it a lot when you hear things referred to as phasey or flangey, because phase and flange, which are two very common delay-based effects used in music and voice production, are basically using delay times below around 30 milliseconds. Now, what makes them a little different from a standard delay is that you're also modulating those delays. So you're doing something a little bit different here. Now, this delay effect is as basic as it gets. You have a delay time, and then you have a mix slider, which basically adjusts the mix of the wet and dry balance. And for most applications, typically around a 75% wet mix will generally work for most things, particularly if you're in mono. Now, let me just start by going to a very, very short delay here, something like 3 or 4 milliseconds. Let's just do 4 milliseconds, all right? So take a listen, and I'm going to turn this on and off as we go. Nerds,
geeks, code, cool, Codebase Radio.
Notapoli, how are you? So can you hear it kind of has this, again, this what we refer to as comb-filtered kind of sound. It's almost like kind of robotic, kind of a little metallic. Sounds a little strange. Sounds cool. And as we kind of increase this, now if we go down even slower here, let's go down to around 2 milliseconds, it should sound very much the same.
Nerds, geeks.
Now let's increase this to around 16 milliseconds.
Geeks, code, cool, Codebase Radio.
And if we go between like 16 and around 30 milliseconds, let's actually make this even 29 milliseconds. This is kind of the delay that's typically used to create what's also known as a chorus effect. So if we've got any guitar players out there, almost every guitar player is probably at one point in time, particularly if you existed in the 80s, thrown a chorus on your guitar. It kind of makes it more stereo, makes it a bit delayed sounding, and kind of gives it this more lush kind of sound.
Nerds, geeks, code, cool, Codebase Radio.
Now, in mono, you're also starting to hear the very beginning of what's known as a slapback, where you're actually hearing the delayed signal separately, right? So when you're below around 30 milliseconds, it still sounds like one voice, but you've got this kind of weird, processed, kind of swirly, almost kind of semi-psychedelic kind of sound. Now, again, when you're processing delay in mono, this same results in stereo will be very, very different. The reason I show it to you in mono first is because if you're trying to achieve these effects in stereo, if they get summed to mono, this is what you're going to end up with. Now, I do a lot of radio voiceovers, and if I just put on, actually, I don't know, I didn't pull up one ahead of time. I don't want to go searching. When I perform these stereo-based effects, when those things get summed to mono, they don't sound right. They don't sound the same. So you kind of need to know where is this stuff going to be listened to and how is it going to be consumed so that you can add these delays accordingly. Now, as we increase these even more, I was just mentioning slapback. Let's go to something like 54 milliseconds.
Nerds, geeks, code, cool, Codebase Radio.
All right. Now you're actually really starting to hear that code base, okay? And if we go longer, let's go to 100 now.
Nerds, geeks, code, cool, Codebase Radio.
Now we've entered the territory which is known as slapback, okay? Best way to describe this is kind of like Elvis, right? So, and to show you that in real time, let me go ahead and I'll make a new multi-track session very quickly. Let's go ahead and we'll stick this on the desktop. I will call this delay tests, 48K, 32-bit, okay. All right, call this voice, set our input device, and this is just to show you what it's doing, okay? You don't have to worry about trying to, this is not necessarily how you'll record with delay and such, just trying to show you, give you a real-time example, and I'll go into effects and I'm going to apply a little real-time delay, okay? Oh, this is a stereo track, sorry, I want this to be a mono track. By design. We'll keep the stereo one there too. So we'll call this voice mono. Go ahead and add a little bit of delay on there. Okay, and actually mono delay for Elvis would be more appropriate. All right, because there was very little stereo recording going on in 1956. Okay. So now you're hearing the delay in real time. All right? And as we shrink this down more and more, and hold on, let me go ahead and mute my direct signal here. All right. Mute this for 1 second. You'll still hear me. Okay. So now you're actually hearing the sound delayed by 1.6 milliseconds. And as we increase this, it gets longer and 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 longer until you have these very long delays. Okay? but somewhere between 50 and 150 is kind of your ideal Elvis-y slapback. Now you're also hearing a little bit of extra delay on here. Sounds like my buffer settings got changed. No, they're not. Okay, strange. All right. So that's kind of a real-time example of what that is. And again, you hear this a lot in various recordings that you probably have or that you've streamed on Spotify from time to time. Okay, so let me get out of here and we'll go back into the waveform view. All right, we'll pull up our stinger file here. All right. So again, mono delays are going to have a completely different sort of result. It's very easy to achieve those kind of swishy, swirly, phasey kind of sounds with delays below 30 milliseconds. Now, when you take the same file and you start working with it in stereo, so I'm going to convert this now into stereo. All right. Make this in stereo. We'll keep everything else the same. Evil Live. Hi, do I have cameras? I've got one right here. C920. All right. Yeah, I'm looking through the comments here. I'm not seeing anything that's necessarily related to audio and slapback delay. All right. So now that we have the same file in stereo. Now, by the way, this is stereo, but technically this would be considered dual channel mono because it's the same signal in both channels unaltered, all right? And I show different variations of this, and I'm going to show you a couple different things as we get towards the end of the hour. Let's go back into effects and delay. All right. And now, instead, let's start with that... let's start with something quite short, a little bit above 30, all right? I don't want to go for that phasey kind of sound. In fact, what I want is just to kind of stereo-ize the sound, which really, again, we want to be around, I'd even extend it to around 1 to 40 milliseconds. Now, this is actually largely known as the Haas effect. There was a German engineer, Helmut Haas, who created this kind of stereo-izing effect by having a direct signal and then delaying one channel 1, 10, 15, up to around 30 milliseconds. And it's kind of the way that you just perceive depth and space. And basically, just by altering the time delay for one channel, you can create this very wide soundscape very quickly. So if I wanted the bulk of this to be kind of mono sounding...
Nerds, geeks, code.
But these last two...
Cool. Codebase radio.
I'm going to go ahead and add a delay. Now, when you pull up the delay effect now, you'll see that you've got separate delays for the left and right. Now, you don't have to delay both channels, okay? In fact, here, if we just do, let's start with just the left channel. And let's make this around 37 milliseconds. This is kind of my preferred kind of radio style delay.
Cool. Codebase radio. Cool. Codebase radio.
So here's without the delay.
Cool. Codebase radio.
And here's with the delay.
Cool. Codebase radio.
And all we did was delay the left channel by about 37 milliseconds, okay? And again, we've got about 75% of the wet mix of the delayed signal feeding that left channel. Now, because of that, if I were just to go ahead and apply this and process it, you can actually visually see that the left channel amplitude is now a little bit lower. So often you will make up some of that gain to kind of balance it out a little bit more. That can have sometimes diminishing effects, but if you instead go to the same delay effect, and this is a very common thing that I've shown here on the stream before, and we're going to do a sort of pre-delay of minus 37, and then a direct delay on the right channel of 37 milliseconds, with a balance of around 75%, 65%. Now, take a listen to this.
Cool. Codebase radio.
So before.
Cool. Codebase radio.
And after.
Cool. Codebase radio.
All right. And if we used, let's say we wanted to go to around 20. So we'll go minus 20 on the left, and we'll go 20 on the right. Again, kind of entering that more direct, phased kind of sound. Take a listen.
Cool. Codebase Radio.
If you listen carefully, now it may be a little bit difficult because I've got some fans and things going on in here, but you can actually hear that it sounds, it's got a bit more of this kind of metallic-y edge. All right, let's make this even shorter. Let's go minus 10 on that and 10 milliseconds on the right.
Cool. Codebase Radio.
Now, it sounds stereo, but this is kind of more like a chorusing effect. If I were singing on this right now and I put minus 10, plus 10, left and right, it's actually going to make me sound a bit more in tune, whether I was in tune or not, because it's creating this kind of fake stereo, comb-filtered kind of sound. Now, if I took this same thing and summed this into mono, all right, and let me make this, let's go back to our minus 37, plus 37 on this. Because this is what I wanted to show you, how mono and stereo are different when you're talking about delays. Let's go ahead and apply this. All right. Yep, Nuncio, it's got a oh, hey, what's up, man? It's got a metallic whirly sound, exactly. And you're going to find that with all of those shorter delays, okay? What did I just do? I processed the delay.
Cool.
There we go, okay. It took me a second to remember what I was doing here exactly. Okay, so now if I take this, and let's just say that we sum this back to mono again. All right, we're going to convert this. We'll go back to mono. We'll reconvert again. Okay. And now when you take a listen, notice again the attenuation. Right. Notice both sides are significantly quieter than the beginning of this. Okay.
Cool. Codebase Radio.
Ooh. So this is what it was like in stereo.
Cool. Codebase Radio.
That's like driving down the highway. Get your motor running. I just screwed that up. That was a Steppenwolf reference. Right? Huge. Big.
Cool. Codebase Radio.
I want to meet the guy who sounds like that when he talks. But now, if this were broadcast in mono at 37 millisecond delays.
Cool. Codebase Radio.
I mean, it's a neat effect, but now you're kind of getting this like kind of thing. By the way, these are only singular repeats. These are not double repeats. Well, double repeats in that you've got left and right, but there's only one repeat per channel. We don't have subsequent echoes. So again, in mono, very different sound from the same effect applied to a stereo file. Now, you can also apply, as you saw before, if I took this file, let me do undo convert sample type. I'm going to undo the delay, and we'll bring it back to mono where it was, so we can go back into the multitrack here. If I took that same file and put it in a stereo track, so mono file in a stereo track, and applied this stereo delay, okay, you can still achieve that sound. So even if the file's recorded in mono, put it in a stereo track, use stereo delay,
Codebase Radio.
and you're going to get the desired effect that we saw moments ago.
Cool.
This is also a good idea, a good way to sort of audition the various different sounds, the types of delay that you'll achieve by performing this little effect. Now, one other thing that I'll just show you very, very quickly. Another way that people have traditionally created delay effects, particularly in non-linear environments. I'm looking at some of these comments. Is this how they did the Transformer voice? It sounds like Optimus Prime. Yeah, well, you know what? I mean, for sure, dude, there was definitely some elements of, absolutely some elements of delay, possibly phasing, and playing with kind of effectively phase cancellation. And that's what you're hearing in those sort of below 20 millisecond delays. That comb-filtered sound is really, it's really phase cancellation. That's what you're hearing. Now, of course, a lot of that has to do with the capture of the voice itself. You know, and then, of course, there's some other tweaking that goes on, and you can EQ it to make it even more metallic. But yes, without a doubt, I mean, you saw, it doesn't take much to achieve that kind of sound. Now, if I take this mono file, and let's make another mono track here, and drag the same file in. Now, this, after I just showed you how to do it with an effect, may seem like, well, why would I even bother? Well, sometimes, you know, if you've got stuff in the multitrack, this is kind of a fun way to achieve the same thing very easily. So what I'm going to do is I've got the same file in left and right. Now, we haven't made any adjustments here. Let me just go ahead and attenuate these by about 3 decibels. I'm also going to attenuate the master fader here. Hey, Paulina, you're back. Hopefully with sound now. All right. So if I just play these back together.
Nerds. Geeks.
Nothing, right? Okay. Now, if I zoom in, and I want to point out that I am in hours, minutes, seconds for my time, or decimal, as we refer to it here in Audition. Remember, I talk about this a lot. Even when I'm sending stuff over from Premiere Pro, I tend to work in decimals because we need milliseconds for a lot of delay and time-based effects in audio. So hours, minutes, seconds, frames don't help us at all, right? So even when I send something over, yes, I know that it's probably in 23976, but at the end of the day, I still require those milliseconds to be able to do the kind of work that I'm doing. So I'm in hours, minutes, seconds here. If I take these files, and if I simply, and you see I'm zooming in a lot on the timeline here, if I simply go ahead and I drag this, let's say 25 milliseconds. And if I do a pan, we don't even have to do a full left and right. Let's even try, well, yeah, we'll do like 75% left and right. And this is a technique that a lot of, radio producer types still use. So you're basically just doing a manual offset.
Code. Cool. Codebase radio.
You're achieving the same thing just by physically dragging the time duration, okay? Again, if we wanted to start achieving that kind of Elvis-y slapback sound, let's just go to 60 milliseconds. How do I know? I'm at 60. How am I seeing those snapping lines, by the way? I've got snapping coarse enabled. Okay, so that's going to snap to the coarse markers of the ruler. If you want finer increments to snap to, you can enable fine here, and that's just a right click on the ruler. So now if we play this back, this should sound kind of Elvis-y.
Nerds. Geeks. Code. Cool.
And so on and so forth, okay? So it's not that the delay effect is doing anything more than adjusting time, okay? I'm looking for some audio commentary here. I should try listening to the We Are the Farmers song. Okay, I'll check that out. What's a good place to buy a computer? I don't know. All right. There's some very strange comments going on here. All right. So we're just going to chill. Beetlejuice. Is delay used in vocal spin and ADT? Aha. So ADT, also known as, the great question, Neil, also known as artificial double tracking or automatic double tracking, coined by engineers at Abbey Road in the mid-60s, designed by their number one clients, the Beatles. Yes, it is. Now, again, that's using, because ADT is simulating, it's a double-tracked effect, so it's a delay-based effect. It's also kind of a black box simulation of what you could do on tape, right? So tape-based delay, tape delay, think of things like Echoplex if you're an old-school audio cat, or Roland Space Echo. These delays, or even just using a standard quarter-inch tape machine, delay was achieved by taking, the play head and the record head and basically adjusting the duration, adjusting the space between the two, all right, to create this kind of delay. Now, I actually have, and Neil, maybe you've seen it on stream before. I actually have the, if I can find it, the ADT effects here. Okay, and am I on a mono track or a stereo track? I'm on a stereo track. So here, I can show you in both mono and stereo, just real quickly. Go into modulation, ADT mono, okay? And effectively, yes, this is doing the same thing, and you can actually see here, right? Your range here is plus or minus 20 milliseconds, okay? To create that artificially doubled stereo-ized kind of sound. Now, we happen to be in mono right now, if I just repan this back to 0. So this is going to create something more akin to that sort of comb filtered effect, or that more sort of phased type effect that we heard before. We're a little bit out of phase range at 20 milliseconds, but you'll hear it.
Nerds.
Oh, and I've got a lot of drive on here as well. There's all sorts of other elements going on in this effect here. Let me try one of the presets. Subtle vocal ADT.
Geeks. Code.
And it's very driven. All right, turn the drive down.
Cool. Codebase radio.
Okay, it's a very driven kind of effect by design. But you can hear it's that same style, okay? Now, if we were to go into one of the stereo ones, they will also achieve that same kind of effect. Let's go back into here, modulation, stereo, all right? Play the same thing. We use the same preset here. Subtle vocal ADT.
Nerds.
Oh, there's so much
Geeks.
drive.
Code. Cool. Codebase radio.
I don't know why some of these things are peaking so hot. It's sort of odd. Not expecting that.
Nerds. Geeks.
And if we go a little more extreme here, let's do rock and roll strong. Again, it increases the delay time. That was a 10 millisecond delay.
Nerds. Geeks. Code.
Okay, that's more stereo. Let's do classic.
Nerds.
And
Geeks.
there's just too much drive because these are already limited. But yes, you get the idea. So ADT is using a very similar time-based system to simulate what we're doing in this nonlinear environment. All right? Cool. Nice. Okay. Funny. Good one, Paulina. Okay. All right. Okay, so that is the delay-based effect, the actual delay effect. It's nothing more than that. It is just delay. It's easy to use. And now you know how to do it. Okay. Now, when we talk about different styles of delay, and more importantly, delays that echo or have repeats, for that we're going to use the analog delay effect. And this is going to allow us to kind of create a completely different sort of sound here. Now, this is, again, very musical. So perhaps for this, I'll actually go into one of my vocal tracks that I've got here. Now, I'll start with it on this stinger just first for the moment. So let me go ahead and pull up, and we're in stereo, pull up the echo effect. Now, oh no, sorry, not echo, analog delay. Now, I was just mentioning tape. We were talking about tape and ADT, all right? So the analog delay, which you see here, this actually has a couple of unique parameters to it. Well, it has quite a few. First of all, a lot more than 2 sliders like you saw in the standard delay effect. It has different types of modes that you can run in. Analog, tape or tube, and then tape style, okay? Tape or tube is going to give you, again, a more driven sort of sound, similar to what we just heard with ADT. Tape is going to be basically the same, but maybe with a little less drive. But analog, for my ears, to be honest with you, and as someone who owns actual old school tape delays, this one has the best sound. And this one also has the most affected sound that works great for all kinds of music, whether it's dance, any kind of house, rock vocals, it just kind of does it. And it has a very analog sound. One problem with delays, and for those of you who've been mixing music or mixing for a number of years, excuse me, digital delays, which were introduced in the early 80s, which were basically trying to mimic this analog style that I'm going to show you in just a second here. Digital delays were traditionally really harsh because one problem was that in the early incarnations of digital delay, and Lexicon was one of the first makers of these, Lexicon Reverbs, which shipped with or were part of kind of the SSL consoles. You've seen some of my SSL plugins on here. When they would have multiple repeats, each repeat had the exact same sound. It was a digital facsimile. So if you heard nerds, you'd hear nerds, 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 nerds. It would get quieter, but it had the exact same characteristic every time. It was bright, it was kind of brittle, it just didn't sound right. And this is used all over. This plagued so much of the music in the early 80s, frankly, it makes it almost unlistenable for me. And if you purchase or you can find like early digital delays on eBay and things like that, I mean, I can honestly not think of too many times where you want to use one of those. One, because you can create it in effects anyway, but two, it's not a great sound, right? It's not a desirable sound. Part of what made analog and tape delay so desirable was that with each repeat, you actually had it naturally had the ability to sort of roll off some of that high end, some of that harshness, and you'd get ultimately these very cool sounding delay based effects. I just saw somebody ask me about Audacity. No, I've never. I mean, I have obviously looked at Audacity, but no, I've never used Audacity. Is it easier to? Is Audition easier to use? I mean, Audacity does less, so in that sense, maybe Audition's a bit easier. Audacity is also free. But I think the learning curve for kind of both of these things. First of all, if you already kind of know audio, then maybe it's not as difficult. But it does a little bit less. So there's more that you can do here, and there's a little bit more that you can also kind of learn from using some of these different techniques. Okay, so like I said, you can listen to tape and tube yourself. Try this out. Which, by the way, if you don't already have a free Adobe ID, you can go ahead and get one, adobe.com, and go ahead and download the Creative Cloud desktop, at which point then you can start downloading our apps, and you can try them out for 7 days, and you can download Audition right after we're done and start playing with this and checking some of this stuff out. Okay. So first of all, presets. Now you're going to find a whole bunch of different presets in here. And we can maybe go through some of these. I don't typically use these. I usually just kind of create this manually. So we're going to start just by setting the wet to 0. We'll adjust the delay slider as it's playing back. And for the moment, I'm going to set this trash setting to 0. The spread is just that. It's the stereo spread. So with your delays, because this one has feedback. By the way, the feedback slider is going to do just that. It's going to allow you to have multiple delays. So if I were to say, hello, 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 or if it were a faster delay, hello, 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 and with more feedback, hello, 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 hello. I mean, you can really make it go to infinity, actually. And if you use an extreme amount of feedback, this gives you a whole different type of analog tape-based delay distortion, which is very cool, and you've probably heard this in a lot of different tracks, a lot of different album tracks and things. All right, so we'll just keep the stereo. It's at 115%. This is just a matter of stereo width of your echoes. Okay, trash. Now the trash setting is going to do kind of what I was just saying moments ago. The naturally occurring high-end frequency roll-off that you would typically experience in analog or tape-based delay. That's what this setting does. It trashes, it messes the EQ of your subsequent delays in a really good way, which really all it's doing is rolling off the high end. It's rolling off some of that high end harshness. So when you say, hello, the next one kind of sounds like, hello. And the next one sounds like, it gets more and more muffled. Now you might think, why would you want that? Well, it creates this very spacey kind of sound. All right. So let's go ahead and I'll start with a wet balance of around 20%. Now, if you have almost no wet signal here, and let's make this, we'll start with something like a slapback, okay? So we'll go to around, let's do like 64 milliseconds here.
Nerds, geeks, code, cool.
With very few delays, you have to add back a lot of this wet signal to even really hear it.
Codebase radio.
Okay. Now, at the moment,
nerds, geeks, code, cool.
Can you hear that when I'm saying, like, geeks, code, cool? You're hearing a whole bunch of very fast delays kind of echoing and trailing off. Now, if we increase this, let's do, say, 200 milliseconds, or thereof.
Nerds, geeks, code, cool.
Okay, now you can really start to hear more of those echoes. And if I start to increase the feedback even more, let's do like 50%. Now this is getting pretty extreme already. You're going to hear that it starts to basically feed back over top of itself. And in that I mean that the echoes actually start echoing over top of one another. And this creates a very kind of intense kind of sound. Take a listen.
Nerds, geeks, code, cool. Codebase Radio.
All right, let's try that again at 96%.
Nerds, geeks, code, cool. Codebase Radio.
All right. If you watched Doctor Who, the original Doctor Who, or any of the probably, first, 10 original series, anything sort of pre-1980, you hear a lot of these when there's some kind of crazy, space chaos and something happens and there's a sound effect and suddenly you start hearing this like... That's how they did that, with analog and or tape-based delay. And literally you're feeding back the output back into the input of the tape machine, and it just keeps going around and round and recycling. Now, the reason you don't get that kind of effect when you have a very short feedback is because, yes, there's fewer repeats. So by the time it feeds the input again, it's so quiet, it's not like it's feeding back over top of itself. So the feedback control can be very cool for creating all kinds of crazy effects, but you got to be subtle. You got to be careful, and particularly with vocals and things where you're going to be, trying to accentuate a voice. If you use too much feedback, it's not going to sound very good. Okay. Adobe's chaotic. Hey, Sandwich Man, what's up? There was a request to explain wet versus dry. So yeah, that's it. So a dry sound has no effect.
Nerds, geeks.
And as you increase the wet balance, you start to bring in the delayed sound of the effect.
Nerds, geeks.
All right, so that's 20%. Here's 30.
Nerds, geeks.
Now, if you dropped the dry signal all the way down to 0 and only the wet signal, what's actually happening here? Well, because you're no longer hearing direct signal, it means that now, by the first time you hear it, it's already 186 milliseconds delayed. Okay? Now, sometimes you do that, and oftentimes with music, you do what's sort of called a pre-delay, where they actually disable the dry signal. And you're hearing this kind of, it almost sounds out of time, because even if you watch the waveform here,
Nerds, geeks, code.
now it doesn't seem odd, but if you bring the direct signal back in,
Cool. Codebase Radio.
all right, now you're kind of recreating the sound that you want. So that's effectively what dry and wet is. Dry is the signal without any effect. Wet is the signal processed or with the effect. Now, again, I will typically keep the dry up at around 100 and just add as much wet as I want. Now, when we talk about trash and things, let's go and let's do something like, I kind of like that. Let's do 230 milliseconds.
Nerds, geeks.
And we're going to increase the feedback, we'll go around 20%.
Nerds, geeks.
Maybe even a little more.
Code, cool. Codebase Radio.
Okay. And let's go ahead and trash those echoes. Now take a listen. This may be a little bit harder to hear. I'm actually going to mute my, I'll mute my mic for you so you can hear this a little bit better.
Nerds, geeks, code, cool. Codebase Radio.
Okay. So could you hear that the subsequent echoes were trashier, dirtier, a little more driven, a little more distorted, and with decidedly less high end? Now, 66% trash is, again, pretty high. I will generally keep this anywhere from, 0 to 25%, but often, by default, I'll keep this at around 10%. I always want my echoes to be less pronounced and less present than the original, and that's ultimately why you're doing it. Yes, it is. It's like double voices. Now, Paulina, if you go back to the beginning, you'll see, it's doubling, but it's doubling with repeats. And that's what makes the feedback setting in this analog delay special, because in the original delay effect, it's only one repeat, right? Or technically two if you're delaying the left and right channels, but it's only one repeat. Here, with feedback, you have the ability to add, any number of repeats, keeping in mind, of course, that as you increase feedback... Oh, and by the way, you can have the feedback set very, very high and the wet out set very, very low.
Nerds, geeks, code, cool, Codebase Radio. Nerds, geeks.
Do you hear? It's still going, right? So just because it wasn't as pronounced, it's still happening. So that's why I say the feedback control. You've got to be careful with this. You can really go a bit crazy, and it can get out of hand very, very quickly. All right. Well, let's try this actually on some vocals. Oh my God, we've got 14 minutes. How does time fly? All right. So fast. We can do something similar, like change the tempo and pitch. Yeah, no, Topolio. Okay, maybe you didn't hear me before. Yeah, as I said, I don't know that it's necessarily easier. I mean, I don't use it, so, and it's been years since I've even looked at it. But if you've got the CC sub, I would say Audition, solely because it does more, And as an editor, to be honest, I just think it's better. Okay. All right. So let's go to one of my more recent songs composed for the game Bubblecano. So it looks like I've already got some effects on here. I'm going to remove that. Got a lot of things that are also missing. I'm going to remove all of these things. You can see I put some ADT on there. All right, so let's listen to this dry first. I think there's a harmony on here too, and hear what this sounds like. So that's how they're doing the scary voices on movies. Yes, Paulina. Yeah, and that's what we were saying. I mean, that's part of it. I mean, obviously there's many other things that can be added, but to get those kind of crazy sounds, that's part of it. Now, if you just want the kind of, someone was mentioning earlier, like that Transformer-y Optimus Prime kind of sound, that's typically no feedback, right? That's a single delay with a delay time below approximately 30 milliseconds. And that will kind of achieve that very wide stereo kind of sound. All right, so let's listen to this real quickly. If this will play.
Animate the shaman great, saving friends from a fiery end. Bubble, 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 Kano. Watch out for the red hot lava, blow your bubbles to the sky.
Okay, so I've got a doubled voice, which, by the way, just in terms of delay, this ADT, artificial automatic double tracking we were talking about before, when you double your voice, if you can sing exactly in the same tempo that you sang it the first time, you will create a sort of comb-filtered kind of effect. Why? Because again, the variation in your timing is probably no more than 30 milliseconds. So if you just have them mono together, it's going to sound kind of phased, right? Kind of comb-filtered. But again, if you spread them apart left and right, it's going to make it sound a bit wider. So here, I actually have a doubled lead vocal, all right? Just to show you this. And this is, again, this is a delay process that's just happening naturally. This, again, it can also create that sort of chorus sound for a live vocal, which a lot of people use in mixing. I use it myself too. So here are the two vocals, basically in the center. Take a listen.
Animate the shaman great, saving friends from a fiery end. Bubble, 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 Kano. Watch out for the red hot lava, blow your bubbles to the skies.
Now, if I take those same vocals and I just pan them, I'm not even going to do full left and right.
Save your peeps and save the day, a lesser shaman wouldn't try.
All right, you suddenly get this very, and it's interesting because they're different, but I'm singing them exactly the same. So it kind of gives you the effect that ADT, automatic double tracking, was trying to achieve without having to record it twice, right? For some, it's very difficult to sing over top of yourself exactly the same way. I've been doing it for years, so I'm pretty good at it. And I learned it and learned about the technique because the Fab Four, the Beatles themselves, used to do this countless times. And they were geniuses at it. I mean, they were so good. They could sing the same thing 50 times. And the only mistake they would make would be saying the wrong word. Like the timing and everything was, and that's partly how they got their vocal sound. All right.
Bubble, 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 Kano.
All right. Chat is always delayed, usually 10 to 15 seconds. Nice. Yes. Yes, I did do these vocals, and these were recorded live on Twitch in the studio after like 6 hours, so they needed a little bit of processing love. So if we take a look at what I did here, on the first vocal, it looks like I've got some analog delay. It looks like I've got it on the second vocal as well. And I've got approximately 180 milliseconds. Now if I listen to that, let's go ahead and solo this.
Watch out for the red hot lava, blow your bubbles to the sky, save your peeps and save the day, a lesser shaman wouldn't try. Bubble, 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 Kano.
Okay, so at 180 milliseconds, this is approximately what I would call an eighth note delay. Now, a lot of your delays, if you're using other audio softwares that do, beat-based song creation, so Fruity Loops, Machine, Reactor, Reason, they will often allow you to create timed delays so that you're not even thinking in milliseconds. You're thinking in BPM. So if you say, I want a quarter note delay, or an eighth note delay, or a 16th note, or a 16th note triplet delay, it will automatically figure out the milliseconds for you based on the BPM. If you want to do this yourself, there's actually a very simple formula where milliseconds equals 60,000, okay, 60,000 milliseconds in a minute, divided by the BPM, divided by the beats per minute. So this song was, I don't actually remember what this one was. Did I do this too? Oh, it's 160. So if we do 60,000 divided by 160, okay, 375 will yield a quarter note delay, okay? And half of that, which as you can see here is approximately 180, which I just set, and I said it beforehand, that's an eighth note delay. Pretty cool, right? And then you can kind of figure out the divisions moving forward. So this is a key little formula, particularly because we don't have loop-based song creation in Audition, really. So if you're trying to get timed delays, milliseconds equals, and it's this formula will also deliver a quarter note delay, and then you can divide or multiply to create all subsequent variations of that. Okay, so quarter note milliseconds equals 60,000 divided by the BPM. All right, so if I did 375 here and played the same thing back.
Bubble, 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 Kano. Animate the shaman great, saving friends from a fiery end.
1, 2, 3, 4, bubble, Kano.
Watch out for the red hot lava, blow your bubbles to the sky.
Okay, that's quarter note, right? And then as we saw before, 180 or 181 approximately.
Bubble, 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 Kano. Watch out for the red hot lava, blow your bubbles to the sky.
Okay, and if we did 750, okay, so we wanted half note delays.
Bubble, 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 Kano. Watch out for the red hot lava, blow your bubbles to the sky.
Okay, kind of simple, really cool. Now, shoot, we've got 6 more minutes. Hard to believe. All right. Thank you. Okay, looking to see. Okay. Eats popcorn, reads chat, enjoys Bubble Kano. Thank you. Spinach would go nicely with music and a nice glass of white wine. Okay. Wee. All right. Now, what's typical for a vocal mixing scenario is to have a combination of quarter note or eighth note delays. Oftentimes, particularly in Bollywood and Bhangra, little thing here, if that's your thing, I do a lot of that style music too. They use quarter note triplet delays almost all the time. And in fact, anything pre-1990 usually has a quarter note and or eighth note delay applied to almost all of the popular singers, some of which still continue today. So like Asha Bhosle, Lata Mangeshkar, Kishore Kumar, they all had this same vocal processing effect applied, okay? So I'm going to turn the wedge signal down a little bit. Now, let's see what we've got on this other one here. Oh, and that vocal is really not very good. All right, so this one, you can see I'm doing actually a little bit of a triplet style effect on this. So if I play these two together now, and let's put them back to their original pan positions, it's just going to make this sound a little bit bigger. I'm not going for wider. I'm just going for a little bigger and a little more processed.
And bubble, 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 Kano. Watch out for the red hot lava, blow your bubbles to the sky. Save your peeps and save the day, a lesser shaman wouldn't try. Bubble, 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 Kano.
All right. And you can actually see that here I used the studio reverb. I can't believe I'm still on delay and it's like 6 minutes to go. All right. Yishun, that song is called Bubble Kano, and you can find it on my SoundCloud. Pixel Ninja. Oh, very cool. Nice. All right. Let's see. What else we got? What else we got here? Have I ever been in Long Island? Yes, but I don't think I've ever had burritos there. So I'm always down for a good burrito. All right, so let's, once again, I'm going to go late. It's impossible for me to do these in an hour. I don't even know why I bother attempting it. So now, instead, we're going to talk a little bit about reverb. Oh, and and there was one more thing I wanted to show you with regard to the delay effects, the actual echo effect. Now, I'm going to tell you honestly, I never use this one. Why? Because this one, while you have an EQ here, so this one has a feedback setting, okay? The echo level is basically your wet dry. And then you actually have an EQ, so you can, this doesn't have a trash setting. So that's what the EQ is doing here. It's allowing you to EQ successive echoes, okay? So each echo, based on the amount of feedback that you have, you can adjust the EQ here. So we've got a lot of presets in here. I never use this effect because to me it sounds a little bright and a little harsh. But if we play this back, this is spooky. Let's hear what this sounds like.
Bubble, 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 Kano. Animate the shaman great, saving friends from a fiery end. Bubble, bubble.
And the reason you're getting that sort of, and the reason why this is entitled spooky is because you're getting this 689 1.4K kind of low, mid-rangey feedback kind of sound, right? And because it's at 70% feedback and the echo level is 100%, it's just sitting there lingering, all right? Again, it's not a bad sound, but it's okay. If we tried something like Delicate Whispers, let's take a listen to this one. Now this has an 1800, so this is over a second and a half of delay, but you'll notice we've cut out 86 hertz, 172, all the low and low mid frequencies have been removed, so the echoes will only have high frequency. Okay, this is the polar opposite of what tape-based delays do. Okay, and if we take a listen again.
Bubble, 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 Kano. Animate the shaman great, saving friends from a fiery end. Bubble, 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 Kano.
I mean, I don't know why. You can imagine maybe in some creepy, film where you need, 1800 is just really long. Again, it's like a second, it's more than a second and a half. Let's take that down to like just below a second and a half. Play this back now.
Nerds, geeks, code, cool, Codebase Radio.
Okay, so you can kind of hear what that's doing. Now notice again, once you have two channels, things change a little bit. The one cool feature that this one has here is this here called Echo Bounce. And this will actually bounce the echoes in a multi-tap style kind of way. Now, this is a bit long. Let me see if I've got something that has these set. Okay, oh, curious, analog delay. Okay, so if you just take a look here, remember what I was telling you, analog is rolling off that high end. So you can see it rolls off a bit of the low end. It kind of bumps it at 689 and 1.4K, right in the mid-range. And then there's nothing accentuated on the highs. And in fact, you'd want to drop these down even more to really kind of achieve a true analog delay sound. But if I play this back.
Nerds, geeks, code, cool, Codebase Radio.
And you hear how each of the echoes is a little darker? It's not trashy though. There's no trash in here. It's just equalized differently. Now, if you turn on echo bounce and play the same thing,
Nerds, geeks, code, cool, code base radio.
okay. Oh, and these actually, why is it not pinging? It should be pinging left and right. It's actually because both sides of this are identical. It's not a true stereo file. But if you have a true stereo file, you'll actually hear these things kind of pinging left and right. So it's going to sound a little bit different. Again, I don't love this effect because it's a little bright to me, and without the trash setting, it's like too much manual work when you can really do it with a simple slider and the analog delay. Bragunt, I stream in 1080p. Everything you're seeing here is native 1080p. My ears. All right. Jimmy, I do stream a lot. What is my idea of perfect happiness? I don't know that I could give that answer very quickly. Okay, so reverb time. Let's go into some reverb. Now I'm going to go back into the multitrack here because I think it's very appropriate to be used in a multitrack environment. Now I've got a lot of vocals in here, and there's a couple of different ways that you can use reverb. Now, as I've been showing you up to this point, a lot of all the work we've been doing was in the edit view, so we were destructively processing those delays. More commonly, especially if you're working in a multitrack environment, you're going to use the effects rack and process things non-destructively. All right. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can do it, and there's a lot of traditional ways that apply, but you don't have to do it that way. And here's what I'm talking about. Maybe I need to go into a different session for this. Got a couple different sessions open. Okay. So, and we'll see how these go.
Then you ain't gonna see it, son.
Hold on.
Slick and slop it, flip it, flop it, cover it up, obscuring the view.
Okay. So, here we have two vocals, each of which has some studio reverb applied. Now, once again, as I've talked about before, we have 5 different reverbs natively in Audition. Convolution reverb, which very quickly sounds very good. It uses 32-bit impulses to create the reverb sound. Reverbs, again, early 80s digital reverb were generated entirely digitally. So everything kind of sounded bright and tinny and thin and plate-like, but not in a good way. Convolution-based reverbs, which most of your new reverbs are today, actually the engineers, and I've done this myself, in fact we used to have a filter in Cool Edit that let you do this manually. You can go into a room and there's a way that you can actually sample the sound of the room, the echo of the room, the ambience, the reverberation, the natural sound of a room, and they use that impulse so that when you send a vocal or a drum or whatever through it, it's actually recreating the exact sound of that environment. So convolution reverb is very good. And to give you an idea of the different types of impulses that it has, it's got a pretty good variety. So everything from classroom, a tunnel, a gallery, a hall, and these will have all different characteristics, right? So if I were just to put on this one vocal here, let me make sure I've got vocals singing right here. If I were to listen to this, let's say with this narrow spiral staircase, I have no idea what this is going to sound like offhand. And we've got a mix control here.
Slick and slop it, flip it, flop it, cover it up, obscuring the view. Comb it over, comb it under, any way you wanna do.
So it kind of sounds like a spirally staircase-ish, okay? If we were to change the impulse to something like a hall.
But if it doesn't matter to me, it shouldn't matter to you, and that's true.
All right, are you hearing that okay? I can make this a little bit louder as well. All right. Hey, Fel Pals. Damon's Bear. What kind of keyboard do I use? Are you talking about this one over here? That's a Kurzweil K2600. Although I will typically, and that's my main controller to control native instruments for sounds, but generally my preferred keyboard is an actual piano. And if we were going to something like a locker room, all right?
You've got a bald spot. That's not all you've got.
That's a social comment.
Just part of you.
All right. Inside a car that everyone can view. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Yes, it's very boxy sounding. So you get the idea. So these are all impulses that were captured to create these reverb sounds. This sounds very good. It's a little tricky to sometimes tweak to get to your liking. I'll be honest, my favorite, you see it 3 times here already. My favorite, and I think the most optimized for real-time performance, is this one called the Studio Reverb. First of all, there's a lot of great presets in here, many of which I created for you personally. All of these drum plates, guitar amp, which is simulating a spring-style reverb, the vocal reverb, some of these room ambience. I actually made these. Now, it actually may look like this is more complex looking at the sliders here. It really isn't. And just to kind of break it down for you, you've got a very simple sort of set of tools. So you've got your room size. How big is the room? And then how much decay? How long do you want that reverb, that echo? Sometimes these two things are interchanged, which is why I wanted to show you delay, echo, and reverb, because echo chambers, which comes out of the 50s and 60s, were basically reverb chambers, okay? They would take a loudspeaker and place it at the bottom of this very long room, and they had microphones up at the top, and they were capturing the distance between where the speaker was and then all that room, and then they would tile it, and some were wood and some were fabric, and it creates this decay, this echo, this ambience. So you can choose the size of the room. Obviously, a smaller room is going to sound a little boxier. Bigger rooms will automatically just sound bigger, more ambient, more reverberant. Then you have the decay, all right? So again, you can have a huge room, but with a very short decay, which might sound something like this.
When that's that. Oh yeah, you've got a bald spot.
Start increasing that decay.
That's not all you've got. It's just a part of you that anyone can view, but they'd have to be at least 5'2".
And it really has this wonderful room characteristic. I just love this effect, and I think this one really, it sounds great on everything, okay? Early reflections are just that. If you want a little more presence up front, if you're using reverb on something, you can increase the early reflections, and this is going to, again, bring some of that direct sound hitting the walls, hitting the echo chamber in advance of the decay, all right? So let's see if you can hear what I'm doing here. I'll make this around 3,000 milliseconds. Take a listen as I increase the early reflections.
Comb it over, comb it under, any way you wanna do it. Stand up tall, don't slouch at all, and you will very likely get through it. Use your hands, use some product, grab a pick or a brush or a comb.
And you can actually hear it reflecting off the room walls, right? So if you want to make your voice pop a little bit more in a mix, this can be a voiceover too, right? It can just be ambient reverb. So we have ambient, room ambience. Notice the early reflections set to 40% because you kind of want it to pop out. You want it to be a little brighter, a little bit more present. Notice the room size, arbitrary, 50% here, but the decay is like 1,000 milliseconds. That's pretty short. So what I like to do in this effect, I'll bring this to around 1600 from 1 to really mimic a good room ambience. I will always just listen to the wet signal first, and I will usually tweak all of these settings while I'm doing that. Now I'm going to show you these here, and then I'll point out the other effects because they all have similar controls. We've already done size, decay, and reflection. Width, you can understand if we're using this on a stereo track. This is a mono track here, so we don't have a width control, which means that we're actually running this reverb in mono now. Your high frequency cut is just that. It's going to roll off by default the high frequencies depending upon wherever you set that cut point. So if you want your reverb to sound smooth and warm, you want to roll off typically, like if you're trying to simulate a hall, like a classical hall, usually anything from 4,000, 4,500, 5K and above, you want to roll all that off. If you started it at 10K, you're letting too much of the high frequency in. So it's going to sound, those high frequency sounds, particularly if you have vocals where you have a lot of S's, those S's will decay because there's a lot of S in that range, and you don't necessarily always want that. So high frequency cut does just that. Based on the frequency you set, it cuts everything above this number. Similarly, low frequency cut cuts everything below this number. And if you've ever heard people talk about, don't add reverb to a kick drum or don't add reverb to a bass guitar, right, you don't want to reverberate or echo a bass or a kick or anything that's low frequency, even a voice, because it can just cloud up those low frequency ranges inside of a mix. So for voices, absolutely, I will generally have a low frequency cut anywhere from 100 to 250 hertz and sometimes even a little higher. Okay, damping is just that. It's going to apply a damper to that reverb. And then diffusion, how much it kind of spreads out after the signal has occurred. And wet and dry we've covered. So for something like this room ambience, I want this kind of bright and present. I'll use this a lot for just straight voiceovers. Let's take a listen to just the wet signal.
Or maybe it would be best if you were just to leave it alone. Just because you have one certainly doesn't mean you can't be musical.
So no reverb.
And since we talked about it, I suddenly felt the urge to be
Room.
more susical, nonsensical and rhyming,
Dry.
simple and subliming, with harmonies aligning
Wet.
and some meaningful words behind it.
Okay. Wet, dry, on, off to audition the sound. Okay. So the studio reverb is really my favorite way to create the room, to recreate the room. And that's the best way to sort of differentiate reverb from everything else. It is a delay-based effect. Why? Because we talk about room decay or reverb decay in milliseconds, which is the basis of delay, right? The difference is it's not just one time, it's happening in your environment. So you're not hearing it, 1,500 milliseconds later. That's accounting for the actual size, the length, the duration of the decay, all right? So studio reverb is my favorite here. And again, there's lots of presets there to get you started. The other one, or other three, just show you real quickly here. We looked at convolution already. So the full reverb, now you'll notice this box comes up telling you this is very CPU intensive, meaning high latency. This one is. Now this also sounds very good. Now the reason I want to point this out is if we have any kind of science-y peeps in the chat today, all right? This will actually allow you to numerically recreate a room, okay? So you can see the standard controls, decay, pre-delay, which I didn't really get to talk about. This is a very common effect, particularly with sort of torch vocals, where again, you kind of hear the decay. Let me rephrase that. You hear the affected sound a little before the decay of the sound. And it gives you this very unique kind of vocal. I don't want an empty lip. Let me try something like a great hall. So this has a lot of pre-delay. Let's see if I can play this back. Oh, see, and it doesn't even let me modify these parameters in real time because this is so heavy. And the reason for that is because and you can also see, by the way, there's perception, absorbent, or reflective. And then you have the actual room size in meters cubed, okay? And then the actual dimensions. And then you can set that high pass cutoff. And then it'll actually give you the actual room dimensions, and you can set the reverb based on a room size. And then you can adjust the coloration. So again, you've got an actual 3-band EQ here to really recreate tile, wood, carpeted, early reflections, reverberation. This is a fantastic effect for rebuilding a room from scratch without using a digital impulse. It's very heavy. It's not ideal for real time, and I very seldom use this. Okay, it's very good, but ultimately you can kind of achieve the same things with the other reverb effects. This one, medium concert hall crisp. Take a listen.
But that's not all he's got. It's impolite to stare when you're talking about one's hair.
Now, if you listened there, and I realized I just said hair and listened there and blah, blah, blah. It had, again, a very nice kind of concert hall kind of sound. And it was crisp, So you can get very, very, and the reason for that, you can actually see it right here. It's because we're bumping 5K by about 4.5 dB, okay? 5K, right below the sibilance level, but there's still a lot of vocal presence there. So it's going to make it crispy. Nice, in a nice way, though, not in a bad way. Crisis is asking, I know a lot about this. Anything new I want to learn still? There's always new stuff to learn. Always new stuff. On the audio side, maybe it's a little less, but certainly in other domains. I'm a big video user and After Effects user, so there's still always but there's always there's always stuff to learn in audio too. Maybe not so much in this domain, but in other ways. All right. What are the specs to run this? Any modern system can run this application today. I'm using. I usually just pull up specs real quick. So this is a MacBook Pro. This is a laptop, 15-inch Retina, 2.8 gig Core i7, 16 gigs of RAM. This is most important for video. The GT750M with 2 gigs on the card, SSD internal, 1 SSD, and 4 spinning drives external, and that's kind of my setup. Okay, so that's the full reverb. Last thing here, if we go into the surround reverb, now this is, as you can imagine, if you're mixing in surround in Audition, it's all the same settings, right? So again, you've got your impulse. Now this is an impulse-based reverb, so it sounds very good. Actually, I think this was actually based off of the convolution reverb, if I'm not mistaken. Room size, damping, low frequency, high frequency, your pre-delay, front width, surround width. So now you've got a couple more controls, and then you've got separate controls for the center channel wet, the left-right balance, the front, your surround channel balances, a separate overall wet-dry, a gain adjustment, and then you can actually meter the reverb in your left-right surround, LFE, left surround and right surround channels. So this one is ideal if you're doing surround mixing and you actually want the reverbs to respect, like if you've got a sound that's in the left surround and you want it to echo in the front right, you can do that with that effect. Okay, that is specifically what that's for. All right. Pretty cool. All right, well, once again, I'm 17 minutes over on my own hour lesson. Who knew there was so much to talk about with regard to delay effects? So, again, we talked about analog delay, standard single tap delay, multi-tapping with echo, okay? And then we went into reverb, convolution, which uses impulses, recreating actual rooms where we provide the impulses. Same with the surround reverb. You then got the full reverb effect. Oh, and I didn't even get to the reverb effect. This one is also, it's okay. It's a little more simple. Looks like it stole some sliders from the full reverb. I never use this one, so you can feel free to do it if you want. And then I just want to point out here, because remember I said at the very beginning, phase, flange, and chorus are all actually delay-based effects. The only difference is that they use modulation. You can find all of those under Effects, Modulation, here in the Effects menu. Chorus, flanger, and phaser. Okay? All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to skip over to working in Premiere Pro. I'm actually going to stop the stream. So thank you so much for joining me for this first hour and 18 minutes. Again, I am Beetlejace, and I'm just going to stop the stream. So you may need to refresh your screen, refresh your app, refresh your browser. Coming right back, and we're going to talk about... We're going to be going through some additional footage of Fuzzy Island, the blues player that I'm creating this little short documentary on, this little EPK, an electronic press kit for Fuzzy, leveraging some live performance video and some behind-the-scenes footage. So thank you again for joining me. Please follow me, twitch.tv/Beetlejace, for more audio, video, motion graphics, and photography. Thank you again. I will see you momentarily. Stick around. Don't go anywhere. I'll be back as soon as I can restart the stream. Thanks, everybody.